Jennifer Lopez. The list of people she would never work with again. Jennifer Lopez, the most powerful Latin artist Hollywood has ever produced, has been admired around the world for decades. But behind the stages, the multi-million dollar contracts, and the perfect image, there exists a list of people Jennifer would never work with again. Some are names no one would expect. Others are celebrities who looked down on her for coming from the Bronx, for being Latina, for daring to dream too big. What was for years an open secret within the industry is now beginning to come to light. It's said that Jennifer Lopez has a perfect memory for offenses, that she never forgets, that her inner circle knows exactly which names are never spoken in her presence. And although she rarely speaks directly about these people in public, those around her, production assistants, casting directors, and entertainment journalists who have covered her for 3 decades, tell stories that paint a very different picture from the press releases and red carpet smiles. This is the story behind that list. The first person to discuss is Mariah Carey. Few rivalries in entertainment history have lasted so long, generated so much venom, and played out so completely in public as the war between Jennifer Lopez and Mariah Carey. And the most striking thing is that, for decades, that only one of the two openly admitted it existed. It all began in the late 1990s when Jennifer signed with Sony Music, the label then controlled by Tommy Mottola, the same man who was Mariah Carey's husband. According to the documentary The Murder, Inc. story, Mottola himself called producer Irv Gotti with a specific mission: create a song for J-Lo that would directly compete with Mariah's new single. The result was that both artists ended up using the same musical sample for different songs, Lopez's I'm Real and Carey's Loverboy, released almost simultaneously. For Mariah, this was no coincidence. It was sabotage. When a journalist asked Mariah about Jennifer Lopez in a German television interview, her response became one of the most quoted phrases in pop culture over the last 25 years. With a perfectly rehearsed smile, Carey simply replied, "I don't know her." 4 words that shook Hollywood. 4 words that Mariah repeated with small variations on MTV, on Watch What Happens Live, and in virtually every interview where anyone dared to mention Lopez's name. Jennifer, who had always insisted the two were friends, had had enough. In 2016, she told Wendy Williams, "She's forgetful, I guess. We've met many times." But the damage was done. In the cultural universe of the internet, Mariah had won that war with glacial elegance, and Jennifer Lopez knew it. Second is Rosie Perez. For years, this story lived buried in the pages of a memoir very few people read. But when Rosie Perez published her autobiography, she included a description of Jennifer Lopez that left the industry speechless. Perez was one of the first people to give Jennifer Lopez an opportunity when the two crossed paths on the show In Living Color in the early 90s. Lopez was then a young dancer from the Bronx trying to make her way. But according to Perez, as Lopez gained recognition, something changed. She described scenes where Jennifer would scream and beat her chest during rehearsals, creating an atmosphere of tension that affected the entire team. For Rosie, who had watched her arrive from nothing, the transformation was unsettling. The most painful thing for Perez was not the behavior itself, but the forgetting. When years later Lopez began speaking publicly about her beginnings, the name of Rosie Perez, of the people who had opened doors for her, was conspicuously absent. In Hollywood, strategic forgetting is sometimes the worst form of betrayal. The third name in this story is Cameron Diaz. Cameron Diaz and Jennifer Lopez never shared a significant film set, but their names became linked by something more damaging than any professional conflict, a phrase that spread throughout the industry like wildfire. According to multiple entertainment industry sources, Diaz reportedly described Lopez in terms no one would expect from a fellow colleague. She characterized her as a nightmare and added that she gave movie stars a bad name. The comment, which was never publicly denied by either party, have revealed something about how a segment of Hollywood viewed Lopez. Not as an artist who had built her career through hard work and determination, but as someone who had risen too far too fast and who did it with too much noise. For Jennifer, who had spent years proving she was more than a dancer from the Bronx, more than a pretty face, more than an accident of success, hearing that kind of criticism from other women in the industry was especially difficult to process. Fourth, we must talk about Salma Hayek. This is perhaps the most ironic rivalry in all of Hollywood's Latino history, because at its core, Jennifer Lopez and Salma Hayek are two women who should have been allies, two Latinas who reached the top of an industry that didn't want them, two artists who had to fight for every inch of their space, and yet between them existed for years a tension that was never fully resolved. The most documented breaking point was the fight over the role of Frida Kahlo. Yet Jennifer Lopez desperately wanted that role. She saw it as her opportunity to prove she was more than songs and romantic action films, that she could carry a story of art, pain, and revolution. But the role went to Salma Hayek, who also produced the film. And then Lopez did something the industry did not easily forget. In a 1998 interview with Movie Line magazine, Lopez described Hayek as a sexy bombshell, whose roles were limited to that stereotype, she suggesting she lacked the acting range for more complex parts. Hayek responded calmly but with surgical precision, noting that Lopez was American from the Bronx, and that speaking of Latin representation while attacking other Latina actresses was a contradiction hard to ignore. Salma Hayek earned an Oscar nomination for the very role Jennifer had so desperately wanted. Few victories in Hollywood have carried that level of cruel poetry. Fifth is Meghan McCain. If there is anyone who publicly represented the type of hostility Jennifer Lopez faced for decades, that person is Meghan McCain. When Lopez appeared as a guest on The View, the experience, according to multiple people present that day, was tense from the moment Jennifer walked into the studio. McCain made a comment about the level of production Lopez brought with her, her team, her dressing room demands, what she described as an attitude of superiority. And then, on her podcast, was more direct. She described Jennifer as a deeply unpleasant person who arrived with more people in her entourage than any other guest they had ever had, including top-level political figures. For many in the Latin audience, watching a privileged woman criticize Lopez for her demands was the perfect definition of a double standard. White artists with the same requirements were called professionals or perfectionists. When a Latina from the Bronx did it, she was an insufferable diva. And finally, the most unexpected name, Ayo Edebiri. Of all the conflicts Jennifer Lopez has accumulated throughout her career, this is the most recent, the most unexpected, and somehow the one that says the most about the complicated position J.Lo occupies in modern popular culture. Ayo Edebiri is one of the most acclaimed actresses of her generation, an Emmy winner for The Bear. Young, talented, beloved by critics. And yet, before coinciding with Lopez as co-host of Saturday Night Live in 2024, she had to do something very few figures at her level could have imagined doing: apologize publicly and in tears. Years earlier, on a podcast, Edebiri had called Lopez's career one long scam and had said dismissive things about her with the casualness of someone who believes those words will never reach anyone important. But the internet has infinite memory. And when it was announced that the two would share the most iconic stage in American television, the clip resurfaced with unstoppable force. Edebiri appeared on camera visibly shaken, eyes tearful, and offered an apology that was described as sincere by those present. Lopez, for her part, performed that night with the perfect smile of someone who knows exactly how much power she holds and understands that the best revenge is not conflict. It is success. Because in the end, that is what defines Jennifer Lopez's story in Hollywood. Not the fights, not the feuds, not the lists of enemies, but the ability to remain standing when everyone expected her to fall. The Bronx does not produce fragile stars, and Jennifer Lopez, with all her battles and all her scars, is the most compelling proof of that.